Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches.
Good morning and good afternoon, good evening to all of you. And you are most welcome to this space, to this side event. We are just waiting for other participants to connect. But meanwhile, let me start from a few recommendations. First of all, this platform has simultaneous interpretation into Portuguese and into English. I thank the interpreters. To set up the interpretation channel on Zoom, you will find at the bottom of your screen a globe icon saying interpretation, and then you choose your channel. Then we also have a chat box so that you can share your comments and your reflections writing in the chat box. I'm very glad to welcome all of you to this side event, the event called Barriers of Knowledge for Life on the Planet. It tackles the contributions of the indigenous people of the Amazon to global development issues. This is part of the 21st session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. This year, the forum is discussing indigenous peoples, companies, autonomy, and human rights principles associated with life, including due diligence, free, prior, and informed consent. We thank very specifically to three organizations of indigenous peoples in the Amazon in charge of organizing or convening this event. The National Organization of the Indigenous Peoples of the Amazon, PIAC, the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of the Equatorial Amazon, CONFENIA, and Indigenous Council of Roraima, CRR. We are supported by Gaia Foundation, Ecociencia, and the Amazonian Cooperation Network. It's great to work together with your active participation. My name is Luisa Fernanda Baca. I'm participating in the organization and the teamwork of Gaia Amazonas, and I will be the moderator of this side event. Our panelists are leaders, indigenous leaders from representative organizations. They are working very hard to organize indigenous peoples for autonomy and self-determination of indigenous peoples in Brazil, Ecuador, in the Amazon, and all over the planet. Now, I will tell you a little about the objective, about the framework of our conversation today. We would like this event to be a conversation based on intercultural dialogue, leading us to get to know and to understand in depth indigenous people's perspectives to development. And we will base our work on guiding questions, allowing us to discuss specific contributions of indigenous peoples to our search for solutions to climate change, economic development, and the Amazon, protection of the Amazon, and specifically tools or instruments and pathways indigenous peoples have trodden this way, so we can build self-government instruments. The second part of this event We will design recommendations to the Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues. And we wish to make sure indigenous people's rights translate into policy and decisions related to territory development. Our format will be conversation. We will give the floor to each one of our participants, and I will introduce each one of them. They will have 10 to 15 minutes to share about this topic. Before I give the floor to our first panelist, I remind you that in case you wish to access simultaneous interpretation into Portuguese or English, you can click on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen, and you have the chat box to write your comments. And so, let's start our conversation with Lola Pia Wache. She is a Siakupai indigenous from the northern part of the Ecuadorian Amazon, vice president of COFENI. She has taken a very active part in global and local discussions, mainly on the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. She contributes the proposals and points of view of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon. We would like to hear from you your assessment about guaranteeing the rights of indigenous peoples in global decision-making about development. For instance, there are decisions being made on energy transition and with attaining national and international targets for climate change. How do you see this? How do you see all this outcome? And do you think the perspectives of indigenous peoples and territories are taken into account in these discussions? Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Luisa. I'd like to greet the whole team, coordinators, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me to this important event. I'd like to greet you from the Amazon on behalf of Confania, and it's a pleasure to be here. And Marlon Vargas, the president of our Confania, greets you as well. Thank you, Luisa. This event is very important to us as peoples and nationalities from the Ecuadorian region. We say that it's crucial to share knowledge towards life and the planet. We preserve, respect, and protect our forests, fauna, and flora live together in harmony in nature. We are spiritually connected. This is our essence, our people's essence. While we are alive in our territories, our forests will remain up because we respect the forest and we ask our Mother Earth to allow us to develop any activities. Biodiversity, towards biodiversity, well, it's our wisdom, our pharmacy, the habitat of human and non-human lives. We, people and nationalities, we do not aim to accumulate just like capitalism. We produce for our consumption, making sure we have food safety for our families. When we are threatened, we resist and we preserve our nature. We own and defend and protect the forests. We, we do not accept those who will cut our trees. These forests must remain intact for our sons and daughters, for present and future generations, and for the whole world. The question here is, what's your assessment about making sure Indigenous peoples' rights in the Amazon translates into policies and decisions related to development of territories, the energy transitions, or the achievements of climate change goals? Well, there are no concrete guarantees that Indigenous peoples' rights are included or taken into account in decision making. And this happens despite important progress in terms of constitutions, in terms of the concept of a plurinational states, but it is only symbolically or rhetorically applied. 51% of the Amazonian, the Ecuadorian Amazon are indigenous territories, and 23% of our territories are under some kind of pressure. This is mainly due to oil and mining industries. The current and previous governments have always forgotten all this. It's very concerning. They have the same point of view of extractive industries for the Amazon, but this entails serious problems for us, contamination of our forests, etc. In the region where I live, the northern part of our country, two provinces, Sucumbíos and Orellana, are the most affected. The oil and gas industries has contaminated our forests, polluted our forests, our rivers, the air, and the underground layers are contaminated or polluted, which is harmful to our health, and many die from diseases such as cancer, and the state does not remediate that. Second, from the point of view and wisdom of the indigenous peoples, the concept of development say that we have to live well, but not the concept that is defended by colonial forces. This has been a disaster in our territories. And so the century-old wisdom is not compatible with development. We propose alternative development possibilities. This is living well. As to energy transition and climate change, it would be, we should state clearly that century-old peoples have proposed concrete measures to stop or mitigate climate change. Nevertheless, decision-making channels are too few, and spaces such as COP meetings, conferences became symbolic. Although indigenous peoples participate, final decisions are insufficient and are made in small spaces of power where our peoples are not included. We are not included in these negotiation processes. We also invite big companies or banks, multilateral organizations. We invite them not to intervene in oil and mining, in the oil and mining industries. They should uh, finance peoples and nationalities in order to strengthen their governments, their entrepreneurial capacity, health, housing, food safety, funds to preserve our cosmovision, our identity, culture, languages, and century-old wisdom in order to improve our lives and leave carbon in, in the earth.
And the relationship between our government and our indigenous territories and our idea is important for them to see the proposals that we have made. We, the people who have been here for thousands of years, so that we can really work in a way that protect the sacred basins. And then from these initiatives, we can create proposals that also take into consideration plans that are beyond a simple development, but that include these traditional cultures at the point, at the center of our focus, a biocentric focus on top of the anthropocentric focus that we currently have in our development plans. According to this proposal, energy transition and the mitigation of climate change will make use of the knowledge of traditional peoples, knowing that we have to transform our practices so that we can use complementary knowledges and respect the self-determination of peoples through education, health, and sustainability awareness, bioeconomy, restoration of forests that have been cleared, among other initiatives. Otherwise, if we don't understand that all of this must be met if we want to successfully transition, not only in the spaces where people participate, our traditional people participate, but in other spaces where the decision making is really done and impact the lives of these territories, it would be impossible to talk about the rights of indigenous peoples and climate justice. This intervention, well, about it, it's important to say that our people will always resist and we will always demand for non-intervention, and we won't tolerate threats to our peoples and nationalities, things that we have been enduring in the Amazon region. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Lola, for your words. They are inspiring, but also very deep in meaning, putting the lives of indigenous people at the core of this issue, and the lives of other species as well, right? The lives of our planet, if you think about it. We will be recapping a lot of what you have brought to us here in your talk later. But now I'd like to hand it over to our second panelist of the day, Sinea Wapichana. Sinea is the coordinator of the Environmental Department of the Indigenous Council of Roraima, CIR, in Brazil, and she also coordinated the Technical Chamber of Climate Change in the the steering committee of environmental policies within indigenous territories. For several years, she has taken part in major discussions, both in her local, regional, and global spheres of the discussion. Sinea is all, well, thank you so very much for being here with us. Before I ask you my first question, we would like all the participants to choose whether they want to listen to her talk in Spanish. There is an option at the bottom of your screen, as we have discussed earlier. You will find a globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you can choose the language of your choice. Now, Sinea, connected to what Lola has shared with us previously regarding the planning instruments that are more holistic and regional, we would like you to also tell us what are the instruments and tools that you find and that the governments could use and are at your disposal as part of the indigenous peoples of Roraima, and also the new instruments that are being suggested and fought for, or new partners and players that could take part in this development program. Hello, everyone. Oh, sorry. I think I wasn't able to listen to the last part of your question. Could you repeat? You couldn't hear me? Just the end of what you said. Okay, so let me repeat that for you. I was asking you about government available tools and also processes that are being now suggested and fought for in terms of the relationships with governments and companies and third parties, where the indigenous peoples, the local indigenous peoples, can promote the regional development. Oh, sure. So, well, good morning, good afternoon to all of you here with us. I'd like to thank the Gaia Foundation for inviting me to be here today, and also Patricia, the mediator we have here in Brazil. And on behalf of the Indigenous Council of Roraima, especially the head of our council, Maria Betânia, I'd like to thank her because we are at this very moment fighting for these same rights. And when we look at the tools, the governance tools in the Amazon, we have created several governance tools ourselves. For example, we have consultation protocols that are now being created with the different indigenous peoples so that we know how they want to be consulted in different areas, because we know that there are companies and projects that target our lands. So we have created all throughout the country this consultation protocol that has to be applied. We also have sustainability management plans, or what we call life plans, in our territories, which make a big difference in the indigenous communities when managing their own territories. And what I mean by that is education, healthcare, rights, culture, and how indigenous peoples in the Amazon are organized to manage their own territories in those fronts. This is a very important instrument that is real, that emerges from inside indigenous communities, but that can also be used to communicate with those outside our territories and the government, or not, of course, but we use those mechanisms to establish communication. And when we talk about the rights of indigenous peoples, we have also worked around our organization so that we know how different people want to be included. And this is part of our life plan, because we must have a thorough view of that and of those tools and instruments, because they have been built with the help and with the participation of all these peoples. In the Amazon, we have looked for ways to really fight for the rights that we already have in the Constitution, but we now need the tools and instruments to make them really be enacted in our territories. Not only that, we also have created plans to fight climate change. And there we show many of the initiatives that indigenous peoples have to fight climate change in their territories. And of course, this is all connected to managing the territory and everything we have done to organize and to resist and to show how resilient we are and everything we do in our territory. So these is some of the things that we have been developing. And Roraima, more specifically, we have our bylaws for the communities. They are similar to laws, but they show how we organize these territories to organize, to solve the problems that are commonly faced in these areas. And with these different tools, we also fight against losing our rights. What we mean by that is this is something that we see all over the globe. Indigenous people all over the globe are looking for recognition, the recognition that we have our traditional knowledge and we need our land to be recognized as ours. We need our knowledge and traditions to be safeguarded, and we use all of that to communicate to those outside our communities. With that, we can build relationships that will help us promote public policies and initiatives that raise funds to implement new projects in indigenous lands in Brazil. So all those tools and initiatives strengthen indigenous peoples who now live in their own lands and protect their own lands and environment. We know that in Brazil, most of the areas that are still protected are those under the indigenous peoples and indigenous communities, and we have to be recognized for our traditional knowledge and how much we know about forest clearing, forest protection, and we do all of that to protect life. Because when we say that indigenous peoples are protected and protect the environment and that we are fighting for our rights, what we mean is this is something we do to protect life. So these are tools that are very important because they have been created by indigenous peoples. They are consistent and recognized because of that. So all those movements that we have, indigenous movements that we have in Brazil and in other parts of the world, are recognized by their fight for rights. We have acted in that sense as well. And we have our assemblies, our general assemblies, where people can come to know more. We usually connect all the organizations in the Brazilian Amazon to get together and decide what our fight will be, what we will focus on, because we know that many rights are being lost now. And these are communication tools that are very important so that we can get together, but also that we can have good governance in our territories and outside our territories. So everybody knows what we want, what we do, what we need. This is something we have to do together because indigenous peoples always work together. We can never accomplish anything separately, so that we converge to fight for a common goal. And this event here today is very important because we can show that, we can show those communications tools that we have so that more people know about our organization, the Organization of Indigenous Peoples, so that every day the world can learn about what we do and about our constant fight for our rights, for the right to manage our own territory, our self-determination, and so that everyone is aware that indigenous peoples with their traditional knowledge have have fought for their right to be recognized for their efforts in protecting their land. And we have now to know how to get indigenous voices to be heard in other areas. We are not heard in many areas, not because we don't want to, but because we are, we don't have any space, we don't have any presence in those areas. So it's important to have events like this where you can hear about what indigenous people are doing, how they're doing it, and how they are using their knowledge to promote their rights and to fight climate change. So this is what I had to share with you today. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you so very much. Just give me 1 second, sorry. Sinea, let me just organize things here very quickly. Oh, great. So thank you so very much. It is wonderful that you have all those instruments that, as you said, are there for communication, right? And that are very important, not only in the work that you do outside the indigenous communities, companies, the government, and in areas where you are going to be recognized for your traditional knowledge and for your rights, but this is also a communication instrument to talk to indigenous peoples themselves and to strengthen the idea of governance inside the territories. And it's important that all the things that you contribute to protecting and maintaining the rainforest in Amazon is fundamental for its preservation. So thank you so very much for everything you have shared with us. We have here one thing. Unfortunately, the president of OPEC hasn't been able to connect. We knew he was flying to Guinea. It was something that was he had to address in his organizations. So in that sense, if you are okay with this change, we will continue talking to the two of you, giving you a bit more time to talk and also giving more time for Julio to connect to later. So maybe you could share with us some of the recommendations that you could make to the permanent forum of indigenous issues so that we can contribute to protecting the rights of indigenous peoples, self-determination, the right to land, and share what your opinion about the decisions that have been taken, governments, states, regarding the development of those areas and also climate issues and global issues. So I think now we can start with Lola. And also your recommendations, of course. What are the recommendations from the Equatorian Amazon people? Oh, thank you, Luisa. Okay, so the peoples and nationalities in the Amazon region believe that it's important for us to take part in the decision making and negotiations. We have to be included in all those processes. This is the first thing. That means that the government needs to take action in terms of inclusion, because the state usually designs mechanisms without taking into consideration our participation from the very beginning of the process, including designing the area. So these instruments have always been designed top down. So we really need to participate institutionally in the decision making and also in negotiation. So this is the first thing. Second thing is respecting the indigenous peoples, because we have our constitution, of course, but we need it to be respected, because the constitution guarantees our rights on paper, but now we want it to be enforced in our territories to protect the collective rights of our peoples and nationalities.
Moreover, I would like to say that we should protect people living in the Amazon. We are, as I said, the owners, and we have been protecting our forests, and we will always take care of it. We wish to stop pollution. In my village, there are many people sick with cancer, and so we demand immediate remediation and true remediation. So the state has to pay more attention to oil companies. And what is starting in the southern area of the Amazon, well, they should be respectful. They should not come to our territories without consulting us. Today, organizations are being divided, and people are starting to work for those companies. So our unity is broken. So the state has to respect organization processes in all territories. We no longer wish new oil companies, no mining activities, and rights have to be guaranteed to our peoples. And this is what I have to say in a general way. And we, as peoples and nationalities, we have our initiatives, sacred initiatives. These instruments are designed based on our people's needs and wisdom. And we wish to work. We have our planning relative to conservation, protection, guarantees to those living in our communities and our territories. And so we have everything there. We have a bio enterprises. Instead of illegal felling, we can do many things with forest products. We cannot live without water. Water without us, without being preserved. Well, I say that water is a relic we have to preserve. Water will become very costly, even more than oil. And we'd like to say to the world that we should protect our environment. And we, people who live in these territories, have to support conservation.
Muchas gracias, Lola, a usted.
You, Lola.
Y le damos la palabra
And
entonces
now we
a
give the floor
Sineya,
to
frente
Sineya
a recomendaciones que usted
to make her
ante el foro
recommendations
siga elevando las
to
voces
forum
de los
to
pueblos indígenas
raise
del
the
Amazonas.
voices of the indigenous peoples from the Amazon. Thank you once more. And some our recommendations now well are. We should demarcate indigenous lands because without land, there is no life. The indigenous people's rights have to be guaranteed. We need a mining law that would kill indigenous peoples, fell our trees and kill our rivers and pollute our rivers. To this end, we need public policies that guarantee indigenous people's rights. We have to force laws that already exist, such as 221, 223, that are in our constitutions. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. We have to guarantee the rights of indigenous peoples who preserve forests and preserve water. We have the largest freshwater basin in the Amazon, but it is under threat due to large hydropower plants. Every time we build a hydropower plant along a river, there is pollution. Some say that those waters will never end. Okay, the river might not dry out, but its waters will be polluted. But we should preserve it because water is life, and our next war in the world might be about water. We have this freshwater basin in Brazil, and we need laws that make sure we will keep them, these sources. We need laws that make sure that indigenous peoples with their traditional knowledge are the one that manage the forest to preserve the lungs of the world, because these lungs might get sick if we do not take into account riparians along our rivers. We will have problems. And this terrible law about illegal mining, this means death, not life, because we know that where there is degradation, where people have no rights, where rivers are polluted, there is death. My recommendation is let's make an effort in order to make sure these laws exist and are enforced. In Brazil, we fight with our strength, with everything we have, in order to raise a barrier against all this. Indigenous peoples have played a century-old role in this war for life. We are organized to say that without our land, there is no life. Without our forest, we will all die, not only indigenous people. We all breathe, we need air. And so this affects everybody. And relative to climate change, we say we cannot raise our global temperature by 1.5 degrees, and the Amazon rainforest is crucial to avoid this increase in temperature. Climate change should not go that far, not only for indigenous peoples, but for everybody. We need to preserve life, indigenous lands, and guarantee that our land will be delimited, marked. Everything that happens in indigenous lands should stem from free, informed consent. And when we take into account all those projects, all those issues raised relative to indigenous lands, we should remember that we have to apply safeguards. This is my recommendations as an indigenous person, as someone that studies in a holistic way climate change. This is what we see. If we do not have a swift action, prompt action, intervention, we will all suffer. So this is my recommendation. Thank you very much. And we remain in this struggle. Thank you, Sineya. You are, I have a message here. The Confederation of Indigenous Peoples from Colombia. They are having connection problems. We might connect someone else, Julio Estrada. I'll send him the link to access. Please help me out here. We will try and work in a very agile way in order to allow him to connect. 1 second, please. So great. Now, while we wait for him to connect, let me summarize the voices of those two indigenous leaders. I'm very honored and grateful for listening to them and sharing this space based on 3 key points you tackled and that are crucial for our discussion. The first point is how in all decisions that are being made, specifically facing climate change, environmental crisis, energy transition, relative to this, the crucial point is behind the transformation we have to go through, the transformation of the development model or the model based on which nature became an object from which we just extract things. And so your reflections are key relative to put nature in the center. This biocentric view, this view takes us from the individual up to the collective aspects and a development model that would be able to learn from indigenous peoples and their relationships with nature. It's a century-old vision, ancestral vision or view, and a knowledge that is based on land. And this knowledge made possible life in forests on the planet, water. And this raises questions about the development model and points to indigenous people's culture, in this case, in the Amazon. Second point, we have regulatory instruments, we have legal tools that recognize those rights of the indigenous peoples, autonomy, free determination, territorial rights, environmental rights. Nevertheless, there is a long way between having this right and enforcing this right, and enforcing these rights in a way that goes beyond the colonial view and in a way that put in the center the point of view of peoples and indigenous territories, making sure we have a consultation and a free informed consent, participation, and we see that we need to protect leaders and that we build together with those peoples mechanisms of remediation of damage that stem from a development model in which are based all these extractive mining, etc. projects. And the third point recognizes values and strengthens those tools that pertain to territories, to the processes of indigenous peoples, tools such as consultation protocols, tool management or territorial management tools, environmental tools that are generating measures, concrete actions towards or relative to climate change. We have those tools. We are all called upon to strengthen those tools. And when we propose development paradigms, we have to put at the center instruments, visions of the Amazon indigenous peoples. This is a kind of a conclusion. Let's see whether we have this connection. Julio Estrada. Julio Estrada, are you here? Well, our time is almost up for this part. No, he cannot access. And so, unfortunately, it was not possible to connect them. I'd like to thank you very much to leaders for your words. Thank you for allowing us this space. We hope we'll keep on listening to your voices and to keep on meeting to study in depth these territorial processes and to hear from you this knowledge, these teachings from your territory. Thank you very much for all participants. Someone raised her hand here. His hand. I think it's Julio. He is connected as Diana, under the name of Diana. Yes, there is a hand raised here, and I think that over these last minutes, and if you agree, it would be great to hear this voice of the Colombian indigenous people. Diana or Diana, please. We have to accept our invitation as a panelist. Please do accept our invitation so that you can be heard. Open, turn on your microphone. See, I'm so sorry about this situation. Luisa, I raised my hand because Julio Estrada is almost connected. He had an issue at Miraflores. We have a few words to say. These words as they are come from a common space. We have discussed with authorities and others that follow this process. We have a specific topic on which we would like to share. Opiak told me that Julio is already connected. Please give him the floor. So he is connected as Julio Estrada. Please, yes. Julio Cesar Estrada. Oscar, please.
Bueno, ya estamos entonces con perfecto.
So, we can hear you. Good morning, Julio Cesar Estrada from OPIAC.
Por supuesto que sí.
May I take the floor? Yes, of course. We've heard the words. We've heard from two Amazon indigenous leaders, and we are trying to connect with OPIAC, and we would have about 10 minutes for you to make your speech, which is very important for us, to us. So you have the floor now. Please open your camera. That would be great. Well, it's quite complicated here. I do not have enough lighting. If you allow me, I will quickly explain our point of view. You have the floor, the space. On behalf of the peoples and indigenous peoples and communities represented by OPIAC. I greet you and I thank the United Nations for this space. Just like other indigenous organizations from Brazil and Ecuador, we thank for the side event that is so significant in the framework of the 21st session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. The Colombian Amazon is a biocultural tissue or fabric protected by indigenous government structures. This is not a for-profit environmentalism. We have to recognize it in its true proportions and depth in the current civilization crisis of the humankind.
And these are things that we do as indigenous peoples, and it's fundamented in our knowledge that we have developed for thousands of years. And it is all based on respecting the territory and all the living things, all the material and immaterial beings that we find and we see in the water and the wind and the forest and everything we find in the Amazon. It all has life. There's nothing in the Amazon that is rid of spirit. There's a spirit in everything we see. And this is part of the cultural constitutional knowledge that supports how we stand in terms of our lands as territories, administrative territories, similar to a municipality or a department. This is possible because the Constitution from 91 says that we are a state recognized in its being, knowing that we have our own culture, and the state recognizes all these different cultures as being valid. So this is something part of the national policy. So our state is decentralized. The Colombian Eastern Amazon is now then conducting a new cultural and political initiative with the help of the Norway government based on a bill passed in 2018. This has been a very enriching experience based on this concept of administrative decentralization in our state, considering that we have a multicultural, multinational country. In Guinea, Amazon, they have freely determined their territories, their lands as a territorial entity. This is the government showing its stand in the local level. And we have also councils that work as a local government, and they are being consolidated in their territorial limitations. This will all be made actually formal and recognized for the indigenous people. Oh, sorry, we cannot hear him clearly. And the implementation of these new policies, they are here to actually correct problems that have come from colonial times with the values and principles that recognize the plurality as something that is fundamental in our country. This process, as I mentioned, is based recognizing our knowledge system and the relationship we have built with the Amazon, which allowed our territories to have very protected areas. This is the product of the harmonic and respectful way that we use to connect and to use everything we take from nature and from the environment. That's why we are promoting a broad national discussions to talk about how our country connects to the Amazon. This is going to be a pact for life to consolidate suggestions of actions that have to be taken by the Colombian government to protect the biome. The name is Listen to the Amazon. This is the name of our initiative. And we want it to be replicated in other countries in our region so that we can protect the Amazon area from the loss of biodiversity and to guarantee the social cultural diversity in the Amazon, to also create a sustainable development plan that was created from, by, and for the Amazon, also in strengthening the power of indigenous people compared to the in relation to the security issues that we are facing, and also to articulate local peoples to protect the Amazon and also to protect ourselves. These are some of the urgent measures to be taken, and we also have to guarantee the rights of indigenous peoples in the Amazon. All of that connects to our relationship with the Amazon itself. The Colombian Amazon is a very important place, and it's where we should be able to enjoy our rights, because without indigenous people, there is no Amazon. And we want to contribute to this process of official recognition of our areas and territories so that we can protect and preserve the Amazon rainforest for all Colombians and all peoples in the area. Oh, wonderful. So thank you so very much. It was great that we were able to listen to you and to your contributions so that we could listen to the ideas of the Colombian Amazon peoples. And it's interesting to see how it connects to everything that Lola and Sinea mentioned earlier. I'd like to just mention two things that Julio mentioned that stood out for me. The first is how, if you think about the territory, we are now making progress in establishing indigenous government organization who have more than 14 different peoples in the eastern Colombian Amazon, creating indigenous councils that work as organization, political institutions, political entities in those areas to enforce the rights of indigenous people and find ways to preserve the Amazon rainforest. This is a very important process indeed, and an interesting tool that you have at your disposal now. Another thing that you mentioned and that is extremely important is that work that helps to promote different initiatives and the national level so that the Amazon agenda in terms of its biodiversity and cultural integrity are protected, have been undertaken, as you have mentioned in your talk. We'd like to thank you so very much for you and OPIAC for their presentation. And I'd also like to thank all of those who have connected and have lended your time to us. And with that, I'm afraid that we have run out of time. We would love to have more sessions like this where we can get together to talk and discuss more so that we can build more things together with the active participation of indigenous peoples. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias para todos. Feliz día.